Welcome to the Princeton Flying School Podcast with Pete Rafle, Princeton Flying School Instructor Emeritus. In this episode, Pete sat down with Naomi Nierenberg, co-owner of the Princeton Airport. They talked about the history of the airport, the early days of the Princeton Flying School, and some of the colorful characters who played a role in the history of the airport.
Well, hello, everybody. We're back at Princeton Airport, 39 November, and we're going to continue our interview series today with a very special guest, Naomi Nierenberg. From my point of view, I can't think of Princeton Airport without thinking about Naomi. They're inseparable. She was the shining face at the front of the house, so to speak, and her late husband, Dick, of course, ran the back of the house with the maintenance and the overall maintenance of the airport. But Naomi had been running the school for many, many years. And when I first came to Princeton Airport, you were the first person I met and have great memories of that first encounter. So I'm happy that all of you are joining us today to listen to a conversation about Princeton and the old Cupper, now Central Jersey Airport, and aviation in general from the point of view of a delightful woman, Naomi Nierenberg. Welcome. So tell me, how did this journey from New Brunswick and Cupper, how did that all make its way to Princeton? Could you give us a brief summary of your travels from Cupper to Princeton?
In mid-60s, Dick he continued to fly. I didn't know he had flown that much before we got married. He had flown while he was out in California at Army Language School learning Chinese. He was bored and took flying lessons. And when we met at Rutgers and I was at Douglas in my freshman year, and he mentioned it but never was a big highlight. And one day after we were married and had 2 kids, he came home and said he had bought an airplane. Tested the marriage because I really was concerned about little kids and a husband that wanted to fly. At the time, he was in the furniture business. Continued to fly, got his licenses, and one day I came home from a meeting, and he and his partners in the Navion were in the living room, and he says, I'm going into the aviation business. At that time, we were in the furniture business. It was my parents' business, and he had been there for 13 years. But things weren't going that well between my father and Dick. Mom had died, and she was really the catalyst between the two. I said, what's going to happen with the furniture business? He said, not my problem. So we mortgaged the house and cashed in every asset that we had, and we bought into an operation on the north side of Cupper. The fixed base operator on the north side of Cupper, where he and some other gentlemen decided they had a 20-year lease. We were going to be able to do everything that a typical FBO was going to do, and we took the plunge. 7 days a week, we barely saw him, so we would go out to the airport to see Daddy. It was a rough ride. He should have let the company go bankrupt, but he didn't.
How many airplanes did you have on the ramp? Do you remember?
Not really.
Yeah.
It had a goodly number. Cupper was much busier than it is today.
So when you purchased the school, were the airplanes a part of the deal at that point? Or?
No, we got our own airplanes. We bought our own airplanes. And it had a school, it had maintenance, the fuel farm and all. And on the other side of the field was Cupper, Mr. Cupper, who ran it. We were supposed to not be in competition, but he died in the early 70s, and his son took over, and things went downhill. He wasn't repairing the runway. He wasn't fixing the runway lights. Don't fly at night. This was his son, and everything was in litigation. It was a very difficult time, but we were prospering despite it all.
You'd been there for about 10 years by that point.
Not quite when the son took over.
Yeah.
And it got much more hostile. There were competition in the traffic pattern and everything. By the time our lease was running out, we wanted to renew, and we couldn't. We tried every which way, but we couldn't renew. And so we started looking for another airport, because aviation was pretty much the only thing we really had at that time. And by this time, Kenny was involved in the airport, too. Actually, he was involved from early on. Instead of going to Little League, he went to the airport with Daddy. He loved the airport. So one day, Dick and I were sitting. Dick had a trailer at that point at Cupper, because he had outgrown his office. And Ken comes in and he says, "Let's buy Princeton." I can't tell you what I thought my son was on, but it really shook me, because Princeton even then was a pretty airport, and it was up for sale. We knew that, but we never thought it would be in our realm of possibilities. Negotiations started, and by March of 85, we concluded, and we bought Princeton. Kenny stayed at Cupper, running the operation there. Dick was down at Princeton, and I went half day to each one. I'd start at the school at Cupper, have lunch on the way down to Princeton, and vice versa. By the way, any time a plane or a car came down to Princeton, it was loaded with stuff. Whether it was books or paper or whatever, we had to move the operation from there down here. We closed the flight school at Cupper in November of 86, because we had to be out by 87. And immediately the flight school took off down here, because there hadn't been one for a long time. We were running airplanes back and forth, the fleet. I paid the first couple of instructors extra to go down to Princeton, and then I realized they didn't need to be paid extra, because there was a market that had to be filled. Mm-hmm. And we continued that way for till 87, spring of 87, when we all came down here. And that's how we got here.
And the airport, as I remember it, had the taxiway on the north or west side, the north side of the runway, and the ramp was about the same size as it is right now, maybe a little smaller. Runway was a little shorter. There were wires at the end of the runway on 206. But there was lots of people who wanted to fly, apparently, right?
When we moved in, there were 33 planes on the field. Mm-hmm. The mechanics were half day. The flight school was not operating. And we kept 2 of the employees. The mechanics didn't want to stay with us, so they walked out one day. And it was a challenge. As soon as we made the decision to buy the airport, I met with the FAA to tell him what we were doing, and he took out a big pile of folders and said, "You're up for a challenge, but I know you can do it. You've been in the aviation for a while." Mm-hmm. Newspaper covered it quite extensively, because saving an airport in New Jersey was starting to be a unique thing, because airports were closing regularly. And the town, we met with the town and the mayor and council, and they gave us verbiage that they too wanted us as an airport. But then airplanes make noise, and it started. My first noise complaint was the first day we were here. And it only snowballed. The next few years were really very challenging to anybody that worked at the front desk, anybody that answered the phone. The town wasn't so happy. There was a lot of new developments going in and close to the airport.
Along the Cherry Ridge Road, is that?
Cherry Valley.
Cherry Valley.
I moved in, and I don't want airplanes flying overhead. Probably half of my day was spent as much in defending the airport as it was in trying to run a flight school. It had ended up with litigation. The town passed very restrictive ordinances that would not have let us make a living at it. So, of course, we had to sue the town. The contention between the airport and the neighbors was really ugly. And it spread for a while to Rocky Hill, Princeton Borough, Princeton Township, and it ended up, we won in court. At that point, we wanted to improve the airport with federal funds, and you had to have town consent on that. They weren't about to give it to us. We wanted to double the size of the airport. The FAA was going to pay a goodly portion of that. The airport was 50 acres, a little over 50 acres, and we wanted, I think we're 104 now. To be able to lengthen the runway and widen the runway, put a new taxiway, we needed that land. And in 91, in summary judgment in Superior Court, we prevailed. Then the town had to negotiate with us. It still wasn't easy, but Kenny was the motivator there.
So just to clarify, the town we're talking about really is Montgomery.
Montgomery Township, yes.
Because we're still in Montgomery Township
right.
here.
Even though some of the other towns try to put their 2 cents in, they had no jurisdiction.
Now, Princeton Township, the line is actually outside of our landing pattern, normal landing pattern.
It's at the Cherry Valley Road.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that didn't matter. Planes fly overhead, and it was a different mindset. It was really very time-consuming and money-wasting. There was a legal defense fund. After one of the horrendous meetings with the congressman who was not particularly kind to the airport, neither was the senators, because they went with the voters, the town, how they voted.
And this was all before the improvement of the runway.
To get there, yeah. There actually was a stop on Princeton Airport getting any federal funds by Senator Lautenberg until the town approved it. And it was in the federal budget. That's how important we became.
That's a feather in your
It seems so
political
long
hat.
ago, because now the town accepts the airport for what it is. It has Montgomery Day, Montgomery Festival here. They love it. The neighbors are quiet. Every once in a while, somebody, but we prevailed because it's here since 1911, and that really speaks to its endurance.
So people who are moving in, obviously the real estate people either can explain it away, or it's not an issue.
Well, Griggs Farms had a label over the airport, so people didn't know there was an airport. When they asked about it, it's quiet, it's closing down. Realtors didn't have very high integrity there.
Yeah.
But we, as I say, we prevailed.
And you're prevailing and improving and growing the airport attracted a wide variety of people who kept their airplanes here, took lessons here, joined the family, so to speak. And of course, I didn't start flying here until 1985, but one character I remember was this lanky guy with a dachshund named Doug Fritz, who has now, I believe the story that I heard was you were responsible for the naming of the Fritz intersection on the VOR approach into here, 12 miles north, 11 miles north, on the final approach course, the VOR approach from Solberg is Fritz intersection.
Right. I think Brian Boyle had something to do with that, too. Doug Fritz is an aviator. He wore an airplane.
Yeah.
Marched to his own drum. When we moved into Cupper, he was actually a shareholder in Raritan Valley Air, the original corporation.
Oh.
I think he had like 5 shares, and we fired him. I was so excited. At that time, Cessna Pilot Center had a package. If you prepaid this package, we get you a license. And I put the gentleman, who was a businessman, with Doug at 8 o'clock in the morning. And Doug lived in Staten Island and liked to go out the night before. And he'd wander in, read his newspaper, take a cigarette and coffee, and my customer was waiting. It got untenable. But we came to a resolution. Doug eventually became an examiner, and it worked out just fine. He was always there for us. He was a colorful person.
He certainly was.
And he was really a shy person, but a walking encyclopedia about aviation.
Yeah.
And very good flyer.
Good fun.
And those are legends in aviation. I don't see the next generation giving those kind. Dave Platzer is a similar kind of person. So are you.
When did Dave Platzer first enter the scene for you?
We knew him up at Cupper. He had Eagle Air.
Oh.
Dick probably knew him better than I. I was still mom and was home in time for the kids from school and went to their soccer games. Dick would fly over soccer games, but I was on the ground. I would say probably 30, 40 years. Well, more than 30 because we were here 34. Mm-hmm. So had to be at least 40 years. Wow. There was some kind of interaction off and on. He sold airplanes. Sometimes he bought them from Ken and Dick or whatever. Those people are very much missed because they can fly pretty much anything. And of course, Dave and Doug could sign off a person who was buying a plane that needed to be given a rating or whatever in that particular plane. I wanted to say one thing more about when we committed to the federal funds. We had to commit that the airport would be here in perpetuity. We were committed to aviation. And by doing this airport can't be sold except as an airport. And that was something that we made the commitment to the FAA. And that's why we put in these improvements and we built hangars. We weren't looking to eventually sell the airport as a development or anything else. I think it's open space. But we built hangars and we invested a lot back into the airport to make it better. Mm-hmm. And that was the three of us always agreed on that. We started immediately building hangars here. And it attracted pilots like to take care of their planes. And so I think there's only one set of hangars that can still be built. I don't know. There's a built-out plan, and Kenny would be able to tell you much more about that than I. But our hangars are full, and we give service. And that's what we, as pilots, Dick always, you wanted an FBO to give you gas and maintenance and things like that. And that's what we were committed to, be a full-service operation.
You've had an awful lot of flight instructors who have gone through here of varying abilities and reputations. I remember a few. I hesitate to mention names, but that's probably the most difficult management part of running a flight school, I would think, is managing young flight instructors.
Yeah.
Got any stories about that?
Well, I always liked the flight school. The flight school is really a drain on the airport. But if you don't have a viable flight school, you're not turning out pilots. And pilots sometimes buy into an airplane or buy an airplane and use the other facilities at the airport. Initially, when we first went in, it was all one. And at Cupper, we realized the flight school had to be separated. Mm-hmm. And I took over the flight school in 1978. Kenny was going off to college. John was in college. And I said, what am I going to do? I didn't really have anything else to do in life because I had put all my eggs in this basket. And we needed a manager of the flight school, so I took over. It was Raritan Valley Flying School up at Cupper, and we took that down here, and now I understand it's Princeton Flying School.
Princeton Flying School. Yeah.
That's since I retired. So I liked the flying school, even though it was such a challenge. Cost operations of a flight school are high. Mm-hmm. You have the airplanes, you have the maintenance, you have the insurance, and you have students. And somehow the challenge was something I liked. And I also liked the pilot shop and the public relations. So I ran the front, and they ran the back. And that's why probably we got along so well. We each had our own delineation of jobs. Yeah. Instructors, when the airlines are doing well, instructors are hard to get. And when the airlines aren't doing well, instructors stay. I can think of a time when we had instructors here 4 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. Their morale was down. You know, they had made a huge investment to get their rating and usually a college degree on top of it. And the money wasn't the issue. It was just they wanted to fly bigger and better. And there was a limit how much bigger we could afford. You know, if we got a multi-engine, that was a big deal. Mm-hmm. This one particular group was probably the early 80s. No, I'm sorry, early 90s, late 80s. They went to TWA and whatever, and there was one last one that didn't get hired at the same time, but he went to JetBlue, and he's got a very high ranking now with JetBlue. And a few years ago, Kenny was on a flight somewhere in the Caribbean, and guess who was captain? Our friend. And so when we go JetBlue, we call him, and he gets us good seats.
Yeah.
There, you know, we have pilots. Well, one of our students was in NASA. He was
Oh, that's right. We had an astronaut.
Ken Ham.
Yeah.
He's an astronaut. And I did contact him. Happened to be home that day and reading the Star Ledger, which talked about Ken Ham. I said, there can only be one Ken Ham. He got his license with us and was a student from Cranford. His parents and sister had to drive him because he couldn't drive yet. I don't know where he was at the Naval Academy. I don't know where he is now.
Yeah,
but
I remember once we had a fellow show up from Princeton. He was at graduate school. He was in the Navy, lieutenant junior grade. He came over and asked you, I'd like to get some time in the airplane, but it has to be a naval aviator. And you said, well, we just happen to have one on our staff. And his name was Weaver. And he ended up flying the Green Hornet, the F-18 with the biofuels. And he told me that he made the USS, George Bush, whatever one he was on, smell like a giant McDonald's, 1,000 feet of McDonald's parking lot. With burning the vegetable oil. Yeah, we had some very interesting people come through.
We had Air Force ROTC from Rutgers for a while.
Oh.
We had Mercer County Community College. Our pilots went all over the world. We also had foreign students that came under J-1 visas, which we don't do anymore. And they, too, went back to their home countries. And
I remember we had some Scottish students here, who were Scottish flight instructor, actually, and some other people. Been great fun, yeah.
Yeah, it's fun when they come back. Instructors frequently, not all of them, will say they enjoyed the instructing and the atmosphere here better than when they get to the airlines.
Mm-hmm.
In the airlines, they're driving a bus. It's the general aviation end of it. That's if they're a general aviation pilot, too. If they're just using general aviation to get to the airlines, different story. But frequently they'll come back and say, I never had as good a time. Might not have made as much money, but they had a good time here.
Yeah, if someone was going to start doing the same thing you did 40 years ago today, what's your view of the state of general aviation?
I don't know. I've been retired, I guess it's 5 or 6 years now. And there's no question I still have an interest in the airport. I still do the newsletter for the airport. I don't do the web, and I don't know the students. And that's bothersome. But, it's time to pass the torch.
Yeah.
And I have great confidence in Kenny. He's finding, I don't know whether it's instant gratification or what, but with aviation, you can't just do it quickly. There's a certain amount of homework you have to do, and if you don't do that, you're not going to get there. And I saw it even at the end. These people wanted they wanted it done and right away. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't happen. You have to do the skills and the learning, and I don't know whether it's part of the tech world or whatever. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think the digital technical world has a great effect on that, because these are the kids who've been grown up with that. There's a risk-averse child rearing going on right now, where a lot of kids don't do a lot of experimentation of outward bound or out, things that really test themselves physically. Parents are cautious about giving kids that opportunity to.
And that's not to say that parents weren't cautious when they had a youngster who wanted to learn to fly. And I sat down and calmed down many a mother or father or both, because they didn't understand aviation, but the kids really wanted it. Mm-hmm. And I had to assure them that it was vested interest for us not to have an airplane have an accident as much as it was for them. That yes, it's personal for them, but we really, as a business, it would really be a terrible thing if we had any kind of... So safety was our primary concern. And I think statistics, it's easy to show that safety still is a primary concern, and that we would make sure that their son or daughter was going to be safe here. And they eventually thanked me, and then the kids thanked me because I helped guide them.
I was looking through my logbooks, and I stopped counting at over 500 people, students that came through. How many do you think have got their start in aviation over the years under the Nierenberg banner?
When we moved down here and we had the college, we had 30 airplanes and 14 instructors. So we had 110 kids from the college and our own students. It was controlled chaos. I don't know. It has to be well over 1,000, maybe more. We have the honor roll, and that was when we moved here. The significance of Princeton Airport to the area really showed up when they would have reunions at the university, and this gentleman with gray hair would come in and say, I soloed here. I think we had somebody that soloed here in 1936. And that was really very exciting when you had reunion and these elderly men would show up. Because
Princeton was operating a grass field over on US 1 with gliders at one point.
That was not Princeton Airport.
It was not part of Princeton Airport, but didn't we do the maintenance here for their tow airplanes?
Yes, and at Cupper we did it too.
So there was a connection between...
they had a flying club at one time.
Yeah.
But like everything else, the insurance and things like that.
But the alumni come and go here, and we got P-Raid coming up, and...
Yes, and they do return for that. It was all part of the color of the airport and where we're located. Yeah. It's an interesting history, and we try to enhance it.
Well, I've enjoyed this chat. I think this is a wonderful... We'll have to do it again, because there's a lot more that I think we could pick out of your brain and memory. I've always been impressed by how many names you can recall so quickly, and so many pilots and personnel here. And it's been my pleasure and my honor to work here. I was only instructor here for 22 years, so I was one of those guys who the airlines had already kicked me out. But it's been more than a pleasure. I always felt I'm sort of an adjunct cousin to this family. So,
Well, you certainly added to the stability of the flight school. You were there when we needed you, and you always gave what you had and gave the best. And everybody that flew with you loved flying with you. And my own grandchildren flew with you, too.
Sure did. That's right.
And you tolerated the craziness of my family.
Well, it wasn't that crazy to me. Thank you so much for coming and taking time out of your busy day. And we didn't even get the chance to talk about your pots and everything that you make.
Well, I have a pottery show coming up a week from this coming weekend.
And where?
8th and 9th. I'll give you a postcard. I'll put some downstairs.
Well, we'll tell everybody here. When is the show and where is it?
It's in the Center for Contemporary Art in Bedminster, 2020 Burt Mills Road. I have been going there. Pottery has been something I've loved since I was a kid. Took a class in my last year at Douglas and have had 25-year intervals. And since retirement, it's become a full-time diverter of wonderful... I can really plunge into it and forget about the real world, and it's been delightful people. And 12 potters are going to have an exhibit and sale at the center on the 8th and 9th of June from 11 to 4.
Well, great. We're
So
going
I
to try to
hope
be
some
there.
of you will come and see it, because
Hope
that's
so.
what takes up. And I keep out of Kenny's hair that way.
Thanks again. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Princeton Flying School Podcast with Pete Rafle. Our podcasts are recorded at the Princeton Airport and are produced by HG Media. If you enjoyed our show, please share it with your friends. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you listen to podcasts.